Hello, church. So we're going to dive into Genesis chapter 16 and 17 today. And we're going to start off with a most important principle. And guys, this is it. You look at the life of Abram, and he listened to his wife when she told him what to do. And guess what? He was still wrong. No, that's not the takeaway from today's message, guys. Just to be clear, that's just a little joke to get you going today. Here's where we're going today. Chapter 16, Hagar is essentially an unwilling part to a large degree of this story. She is a slave girl that Abram and Sarah have picked up in Egypt, and they have brought her now along with them, and they've got this ungodly solution to their problem of not being able to have children. And so Hagar becomes Abram's wife and conceives a son through that. Hagar gets abused by Sarah after this happens. And if you look in verse 9, she has fled from Sarai at this point and is alone and in desperate need. She cries out to the Lord, and he hears her. And this is an amazing thing, because there's two aspects of this that I think there's a lot we can take away from. One, even in the place where Hagar has been mistreated, the Lord tells her, go back and submit to Sarai. And that's a really important principle, because it was not fair in many aspects of this story for Hagar, and yet God still commands her to do that. That is very much in line with what we read in the New Testament, for example, in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, or when we read in Romans chapter 13, verse 4. We are called as believers to submit to the authorities in our lives, even when it does not seem fair. And there is often a special blessing from the Lord that accompanies our obedience when we are willing to do that in honoring of him. And so I want to encourage us to think about that. The second thing that happens with Hagar is that she is assured from the Lord she will have a son, and the Lord tells her, you are to name him Ishmael. The name Ishmael means God hears. And so Hagar would have a constant reminder in the name of her son that God hears her. And in return, as an act of worship, I believe, to the Lord, Hagar names the Lord the living one who sees me. It is an amazing truth to know that even in our darkest place, God sees us and cares about us. And we must never forget that. Then if we jump to chapter 17, we've got this difficult, in many ways uncomfortable chapter that talks about circumcision. And there are a few important points that we need to draw out of this story. The first one, in verse 14, we can see that, so just to summarize circumcision, we'll just call it this. It is often seen as the cutting off of the filth in our lives. It is the cutting off of the sinful nature, and it is being clean and holy to the Lord. But we also got to notice in verse 14, it is also a symbol, if you will, of who we are before the Lord apart from being circumcised in heart. So the people of Israel were going to be forsaken from the covenant community of the Jewish people if they were not circumcised. And that is essentially who we are if we are not circumcised in heart as part of God's people. Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 4, verses 9 to 13, that it is no longer physical circumcision that is required in the new covenant, but circumcision of the heart. And if we have not undergone the transformation of receiving Christ into our lives and receiving this new nature, if you will, of who we are not part of God's covenant people if we have not undergone the circumcision of the heart, the removing of the sinful flesh, the removal of the sinful deeds of what we desire to be apart from God, and embrace and follow in obedience who he calls us to be as part of his children now in this new life. So a few questions you might want to ask yourself today are this. Number one, in regards to Hagar and the command God gave her, are there authority figures in my life? Maybe with the government, maybe in the church, maybe in your family, maybe at your place of work or in your community. Are there authority figures that I am walking in rebellion to, either in action or in attitude, that God would want me to repent of? Just ask him that question. The second thing I want to maybe encourage you to ask the Lord with is, am I delaying obedience? When Abraham was given the command to be circumcised, it says he immediately obeyed. And that is characteristic of Abram, to always obey right away without consideration of cost or how much it would hurt. And so are we doing that? And the third question would be, are there areas of my life, in my heart, that are spiritually uncircumcised, that God would want me to repent of? I'd encourage you to pray through maybe one or two of those questions and have a blessed day as you walk with Jesus.